Hi friends, this is Grandmaster and Markos for the server ChessFriends.com. As Fielder said, pawns are the soul of the game. So today we'll be psychoanalysts. We will focus on this soul and we will see its flaws and its good sides, and we'll try to find out how to deal with pawns and pawn structures. The game I have chosen today is not one of the games of the Super Grandmasters. Actually, it's my game, but I've chosen it because it's very instructive and I like it quite a lot. So it's my game against Mr. Saltaev in the German Bundesliga in the year 2008. So I played d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, e3. So this is well known, and now Saltaev played a6, which is a semi-waiting move. Black on the one hand prepares b5, and on the other hand waits that maybe this bishop can go freely out in some lines. Because after e3, the other main move is e6, which closes this bishop behind the pawn chain. So with a6, black can wait a bit. The important thing to know is that bishop f5 is not so good because white simply takes and plays queen b3. And now all other moves than bishop c8 lead to quite big problems. For example, after queen d7, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the threat of knight d5 is extreme. So black has big problems. So e3, a6, white plays knight f3, which is very natural, and black plays b5. And now the line I have chosen was c4, c5. At first, when the Chebanenko line with a6 was being played, this was considered to be harmless, because white doesn't attack the center anymore, which enables black to prepare e7, e5, and also this bishop stays behind the pawn chain and will remain relatively passive for at least next few moves. So this was considered to be pretty good for black. But there is one problem which is much more important all of this, and the problem is that and the problem is that this c6 pawn is a weakness and will stay and remain a weakness for the rest of the game, because the c5 pawn is more or less untouchable. Black doesn't have b6 anymore and he doesn't have d6 anymore. So and e7, e5 isn't enough to undermine the stability of the c5 pawn. So black will remain with the c6 pawn for the rest of this game, and this pawn will be quite a big weakness further in the game. It's quite difficult to cover this pawn, for example, because all the pieces which would cover it will themselves or may themselves become weaknesses because they are behind the pawn chain and therefore are not naturally protected. So the c6 pawn is a bigger problem than it appears. For example, if black plays the most natural move, which is bishop g4 in my opinion, the weakness of the c6 pawn will tell very quickly. White plays queen b3, which looks illogical, but is on the contrary it's perfectly logical, because after e6 white plays a4, and now black has big problems with this rook. It's not protected well enough because the bishop is no more on c8 to protect it from b7. Therefore black has to play something like knight b7, and white can attack the a8 rook once more. So black has to go away, and after 8 takes b5, 8 takes b5, some queen a5, the weakness of the c6 pawn will tell much more. For example, black exchanges, and now white has plenty of ways how to attack the pawn, and black doesn't have so many how to protect it because the bishop is away. The knight would need to be in ultra passive position on b8. So this is not so good, this bishop g4. Therefore black played here, black played g6. So again the same strategy as a6. Black doesn't move the c8 bishop, but he still hopes that the bishop will get out along the diagonal c8 h3, so he doesn't really block it. So white played bishop d3 and black played bishop f5. So now the bishop gets out. Now the same idea, if I take what happened in the game actually, and now if I play bishop, the queen b3, bishop g7, h4, knight bd7, queen a3, it doesn't work anymore because black castles and is protected twice. He's attacked twice, and he's also protected twice, so he holds his ground here. But the problem with bishop f5 is somewhere else. After bishop takes f5, g takes f5, a new weakness arises in black's position. The weakness is the double pawn, f7, f5. But what does it mean that it is a weakness? Because when black plays e7, e6, he protects it quite well. Well, a double pawn is a weakness in a broader sense of this term. The problem with double pawns is that they demobilize the entire pawn structure, because black can play e7, e6, but he cannot really play e7, e5 with a pawn somewhere on g6 or g7 instead of f5. e7, e5 would be a nice plan, but here not, because such a movement in the center would leave the f7 and f5 pawn extremely weak, and isolated double pawn what can be worse in a pawn structure. So a structure with a double pawn is always a defensive structure, or almost always defensive structure, which holds together and can only sit and wait. For example, it is similar to a broken leg. When you have a broken leg, you have to bind it carefully and never move it. So this is some broken pawn position, and also it leads to immobility of this pawn structure. And furthermore, white's got two knights. He's got this c3 knight and f3 knight, and these two knights will go or may go very soon to pawns like to fields, squares like e4 and f4 and e5, and on these squares they feel very well, because black has problems to get rid of them using their pawns. The pawns may not the pawns cannot really move because there's a double pawn, so and also there is no g pawn, so there is no way how to attack, for example, the f4 knight. So that are these two disadvantages of a double pawn. Firstly, it leads to an immobile structure, and secondly, it gives more space for the knights.